You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi everyone, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. This week's episode is about project planning. This is a skill or set of techniques that is really crucial to entrepreneurship. It's absolutely vital if you want to keep your business on track, make money, and keep your customers happy, that you're able to plan and manage your projects effectively. But it's also a skill that is really vital in personal life for anything that you want to achieve in life, being able to plan your projects so that you can get what you want out of life. And I see project planning as part of conscious living, as really part of self-knowledge. My own approach to project planning has changed and developed a lot over the years. It's something that I am very interested in. I've read a lot of books about this, and I've also taken an interest in it because when I first started thinking about project planning more seriously, I realized how difficult I found it and how bad I was at planning projects. And I certainly experienced the downsides of that. A lot of problems that I had in business were to do with projects that I hadn't planned effectively. And I still find that if I ever encounter procrastination or avoidance or feel stuck in working towards a goal that I have, it's usually because I haven't done effective project planning. I haven't done enough effective project planning. So I want to share with you my approach to doing this, which I've taken from Getting Things Done by David Allen and from a range of other places as well. And I'll give you my take on it, but I'll also put links in the show notes. My experience has been that if you get a good handle on project planning, it gives you so much more clarity with yourself and with other people, either that you're working with or in your personal life, any other relationships you have, about what you're doing and what your motivations are and what your purpose is. Really, really helps both gain self-knowledge for yourself and also gain clarity with others. So project planning is one of those skills that often people come to look at when they begin to collaborate with others. This was certainly my case. I started to try and learn more conscious skills for project planning when I started to employ people and work collaboratively together with other people in teams. And as my working life progressed, I had to work with lots of other people and I had to try planning better in order to do so. And I want to make the argument in this podcast that is the worst time to start learning project planning skills when you're actually employing other people or working collaboratively in teams. You are so much better at collaborating on projects with other people if you already apply some of these techniques in your own personal life. My experience is that if you take project planning as a skill to apply in your personal life to yourself first and to all aspects of your life, it gives you such a strong foundation that it really helps when you then do come to plan collaborative projects with other people. So I think there's real value in taking the skills of project management and applying them to yourself in your own personal life, in all aspects of your life, learning the skills and gaining the experience and applying the principles to projects that are just your own individual projects so that it becomes a second nature to you to how to plan a project effectively. Because you cannot have any credibility with other people in planning a project collaboratively with them if you don't already have the skills for yourself. If you get to a point in your working life where you're managing other people and you have employees working for you and you have to start planning projects involving other people and delegating work to them, if you don't already have those skills kind of second nature, then you're not going to have any credibility in planning. And I mean, it's a bit like an obese person giving you fitness tips. Your employees are not going to see any credibility in your project plan if it's clear that you can't plan your own life. So my approach is very much now to take project planning as something that I use in all aspects of my life, and I use it fundamentally and most importantly with myself, and building on that, I use it in collaborative projects when I need to. But it starts with yourself, and that I think is a really useful foundation for all of these skills. So that's why in this episode I'm going to principally talk about individual projects that you're planning for yourself. And much of what I'm going to be talking about comes from the idea of natural project planning. That's an idea that David Allen talks about in his book, Getting Things Done. And it's an approach to project planning which really tries to be as conscious as possible about the purpose of what you're doing, and about what success looks like, and finding a way to really gain a lot of conscious insight into your activities so that you're not just rushing around doing busy work, but you really know why you're doing what you're doing. And you can look up natural project planning, but I'll give you my take on it in this podcast and just explain to you how I apply it. So first of all, what is a project? A project is simply an outcome that you want to reach that has more than one step to achieve it. So if you have something that you want to see done and it involves more than one step, then it's a project. You know, on a really simple level, you could have a project which would be to fix a leak in your house, because you might need to call a plumber, or you might need to go and purchase something from a hardware store. I mean, there may be a few multiple steps involved, but it's a fairly simple, straightforward project. On a more complex level, you can have a project as complex as selling your house, which has many, many more steps involved in terms of putting it on the market and the legal side and so on and so forth. So I think it's helpful to think of all of these things as projects, regardless of whether they're big or small, and they can all benefit from project planning. But there is a distinction between projects that you don't really need to do a lot of planning on because they're really simple and straightforward, and projects that are more complex where it really helps to do more planning. So I have an approach which is to have a minimum amount of project planning that I apply to everything, and then I have a more detailed project planning that I only use on projects where I need it. So here's a suggestion for the very minimum level of project planning that you need to do on every single project. The first really useful thing is to name the outcome of the project. It's very easy to start working on something without being 100% clear with yourself about what a successful outcome looks like. So in the example I gave earlier, I said there was a leak in your house as a project. So the outcome that you want is to fix the leak. Once you name the outcome and you know what you're doing, then you know when you finish the project and you're clear with yourself to what you're working towards, basically. So that's the most important thing, is to name the outcome. The second thing is to always know what the next action is. And this is something that I talked about previously on other productivity episodes. But if you do a weekly review where you review all your projects, part of that review is to make sure that you know what the very next thing that you need to do to move that project forward is. So, for example, it might be that you need to buy something from the hardware store, or alternatively, it might be that you need to phone a builder or a plumber or something to fix this leak in your house. And the third thing that is really a minimum for every single project is to review it regularly. So, as part of your weekly review, you look at all your projects and you make sure that you know what you're doing and that it's moving forward. So those are the three things. Name the outcome, know what the next action is, and review it regularly. I do that within a task management system, and the one that I use is Omnifocus, which is on the Mac. You can do it on paper, or you can do it in any other system you like. There are loads and loads of task management systems out there. As I said, the one I use is Omnifocus. So that's the minimum approach that I apply to every single project. And one of the things that I find is that with that minimum approach, if I ever encounter that I'm getting stuck or the project's not moving forward, I'm not really sure what I'm doing, finding it hard to identify the next action, that's a sign to me that I probably need to think more deeply about the project and to do more detailed project planning. And that's when I go on to the more detailed project planning, which involves a number of steps. And the first of which is to create some documentation for the project. So this is something that I do in Evernote. You can do it anywhere you like, but I like to use Evernote because I can link the project page back to my task manager, which is Omnifocus, so that I can always jump from my task manager directly to the documentation for the project and I know what I'm doing. And I have a template in Evernote with all of the things that I fill in to do the project planning. And this is where I use a lot of the ideas from getting things done about natural project planning. And I'll explain some of those as I go. So the project documentation is really a place to do some more deep thinking about what it is that you're doing with this project so that you have a better plan for how to achieve your aim. And the first most useful thing for me beyond anything else is to do a mind map. This is something I mentioned in the podcast I did last week on goals. I find mind maps so helpful that this is, again, the first thing that I do when doing project planning. I put the name of the project in the middle of a mind map and I start drawing links and think of everything that comes to mind for me. And that is often enough for me to know what I'm doing. Just by mind mapping the project, I have a much better idea. And if I've been a bit stuck on a project, then that gives me a great perspective to kind of reboot my thinking and get moving forward. So I really recommend doing mind maps for any project that beyond the very, very simple, straightforward, tiny project that's just got 2 or 3 actions. So the next thing that I do in terms of documentation is to fill out a template that I've made for myself with some of the key questions that it's really useful to ask yourself when you're doing project planning. And these questions come from getting things done. I've adjusted them and amended them for myself and added some things that work best for me and so forth. I recommend, if you haven't read the book, then read Getting Things Done, but I'll also share with you what my template says, just so that you can see some of the things that I am looking at. So the first thing that I do is to look at the purpose and principles of the project and really just write down what the purpose of the project is. I'm often surprised how unclear the purpose of a project is to me when I think it's clear, and then I come to write it down and have to do some real thinking. So I fill in a template that says, this is being done because, and I fill in the blanks, and I write on purpose means, and then I fill in the rest of that. And I have a couple of other things to fill in, which are the key standards to hold in making decisions and acting on this project are, and the rules that I'm using for this project are. And when I fill in those sentences, that gives me a very clear understanding just for myself to what the purpose and principles are that I'm using for this project. Again, this is all stuff that it's only me looking at this, but just by writing this down, it's really, really helpful. The next section I look at is the mission, the vision, and the successful outcome of the project. And to do that, I fill in a sentence that says, if this were totally successful, ... and I fill in the rest of that. Or you can put it in another way, the best possible wild success for this project would look like ... And that gives me a real goal to work towards. Not just, what does being done mean, but what would be the best success that I can aim for on this project. And very simply, sometimes I also just write down done means, and then I fill in whatever done means, whatever getting this project finished is going to mean to me. So that's some of the useful things that I do, along with the mind map. If I've filled in the purpose and I've got a clear sense of the outcome, that often helps me a huge amount. But I often do more brainstorming and journaling as well. And I have some more things in my template for brainstorming and journaling. But I think this is something that you can also work through and identify for yourself. The basic idea is to journal or write down everything that you're thinking about the project, what you know at the moment about the project, things that you don't know, anything that you think you ought to consider, anything you think you haven't considered yet. Just write it all down and get it out of your head, basically. The process of writing down is enormously helpful in planning. And then I have some brainstorming techniques. For example, one of the ones that I picked up from somewhere is to ask 50 questions about this problem that I'm working on for this project. And that can be a useful way of kind of prompting you to think more creatively about the project. Once I've done that, the next thing I do is to start getting much more concrete and specific and write down all of the component parts of the project. So if there's a number of different things that need to happen in order for the project to succeed, there are different components and I write them all down. For example, in selling our apartment, we need to market the flat. We also need to go through all of the legal stuff with the solicitor. We need to sell off all our furniture. And there's, a number of other components. And these are different things to do with the process of selling our apartment. And as well as the components, there's milestones. So that's key points within the process of the project that are kind of change points when something fundamentally has been reached, and you call it a milestone in project planning. And so, for example, when we accept an offer on our flat, that will be a key milestone. And when we exchange contracts, that will be another key milestone. So that's the documentation side, and all of the things that I've talked about in there to do with thinking about the project, the journaling, the mind mapping, writing down the purpose and so forth. That's all of this idea of natural project planning. It's a way of being really creative in the planning process and trying to think through to a point where you really understand what you're doing, or you're really conscious about what you're trying to get out of this project and what all of the issues involved are. Beyond that, there is the actual nuts and bolts planning work to do. And there's two aspects of that. One is what I'm calling sequencing, and the other is what I'm calling the work plan. Now, I use the tool Omnifocus to do all of this when I'm planning a project for myself, because it's my task management system and it's where I actually do the work and check off tasks once I've done them. So it makes sense to me to plan everything in that same place. You can use other systems as well, but what I'll do is I'll explain what I'm doing when I'm planning a project in Omnifocus, and then you can apply that to whatever system you're doing, whether it's on paper or using a different app or whatever. So the sequencing is really taking the milestones and all of the components and subcomponents of the project, the different parts of the project that you've written about in your project documentation, and it's putting them all together in a sequence so that you know what happens first, what happens next, and so on and so forth until the project is complete. And not only that, but you also know which parts of the project can run in parallel and which parts are dependent on a previous part being finished. So sometimes there are some things that you can work on two different aspects of a project at the same time, and that's when those different aspects are running in parallel. And the other times there are sequences of things that you need to go through. You have to do one thing first, and then you have to get that finished, reach a milestone, and then go on to the next section of the project and so forth. And these are all the same kind of project planning skills that you'll need to do on a huge project where you're working with hundreds of people. But if you apply these just to yourself for everything that you do, even for projects where it's only you, then it just becomes second nature to you, and you just think about projects in that way. And that really helps you in your skills with project managing other people. So that's the sequencing, setting up of all the tasks. As I said, I do that in Omnifocus. And then there's the actual work plan itself. And that's a question of scheduling when you're going to do what tasks you're going to do this week and what your due dates are. And I, again, do all of that in Omnifocus. I add due dates where necessary, and I also do a work plan for myself. I actually do that part in Evernote in each week. But all of the due dates and everything are in Omnifocus. And one of the things that I find incredibly helpful about Omnifocus is that it allows you to only see those tasks which are available to you because they're not dependent on anything else being finished first. So in other words, if you create a project plan in Omnifocus where you have a clear sequence of things that need to get done in a certain order, then you can only view those tasks that are currently live tasks, and you can hide anything else that you can't yet do because you need to finish something else first. And that's a really helpful tool for me because it means that I can make a big plan, but then when I'm actually working day to day, I don't have to keep referring to the plan. I can just be ticking off tasks and getting things done because my plan is already set and ready, and the software application, the task management application that I'm using, will show me whatever the next task is, and so I can just focus on working. I don't have to replan my work every single day, and that is really, really helpful. It means that you can get into a frame of mind where you project plan and you do it really well, and then you can get into another frame of mind where you're just executing, just getting tasks done. So the last aspect of the project plan is really just to make sure that you keep it live. And that is very much what I do in the weekly review. Every week, I go through all of the project plans that I have, and I make sure that in Omnifocus, all the tasks are lined up and ready, so I know what I'm doing next, and I know what's going to happen after that. And if I am in any doubt or not quite sure what I'm doing, I go back and have a look at the project documentation, and I sometimes journal a bit more and write a bit more, and I find that very helpful too. For complex projects, it's very much the same as for simple projects. You always need to know what your next action is, and you always need to keep doing a weekly review. And of course, you need to know what the outcome is that you're working towards. So that's a very brief overview of my system for project planning. I really recommend that you look into this in more detail and develop a kind of methodology and system for yourself that you apply in everything that you do, so you have at least a basic minimum amount of planning that you apply to every project that shows up in your life as a way of life, because it is incredibly helpful and it sets you up for doing more complex projects so well, because you're already using the same skills in everyday life. And of course, it helps you to achieve your goals and get the things done that you want to get done, which is what everyone wants. So I find it incredibly helpful in just getting to live the life that I want to live and reaching the goals that I want to achieve. So I hope that's helpful to you too. I'd love to hear any feedback that you have about project planning. If you think I've missed anything or have any other suggestions, let me know, and that would be great to hear. If you enjoyed this, then don't forget to check out my book, Becoming an Entrepreneur, which you can find on Amazon and also through the Voluntary Life website. If you get a chance to leave me a review on Amazon, that would be a great help. And if you'd like to support the show, then please donate at thevoluntarylife.com as well. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you have feedback about the show, please email jake@thevoluntarylife.com. If you enjoyed this program, please share the podcast with your friends or click the donate button on thevoluntarylife.com.